Well, hello. Welcome to the Creative Writing Life podcast, where we talk with writers from all mediums and genres about themselves, their work, and advice they have for writers. I'm your host, Paul Zeidman, and my guest today is the author of these are so big, the Davenport's series, this yellow one, the one I'm holding up right now. If you're watching this, this is the original one from earlier this year, last year.
2023.
2023, so last year. And the new one is The Davenport's More Than This, which just came out, I believe, just a couple of weeks ago.
That's
Okay,
correct.
and this is Krystal Marquis. She is the author, and I just dropped one of my cards, but I'll get that in a little bit. Krystal, welcome to the Creative Writing Life podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to chat with you and talk about everything that's writing and, whatever questions that you have for me.
Okay, and I'm going to read the bio that is in the back of your new book, The Davenports More Than This. Krystal
Mhm.
Marquis is the New York Times bestselling author of The Davenports, her debut novel. Krystal happily spends most of her time in libraries and used bookstores. She studied biology at Boston College and University of Connecticut, and now works as an environmental health and safety manager for an online retailer. When not writing or planning trips to the book barn to discover her next favorite romance, Krystal enjoys hiking, expanding her shoe collection, and this is a very devious implication, plotting ways to create her own Jurassic Park. Oh my goodness.
Mhm.
Uh,
Yes. I
okay.
don't have a secret lab anywhere.
Are you just collecting various DNA to replicate and have a sanctuary of your own?
Yes, yes. Why not? They are, I don't know,
Okay.
wonderful creatures. I think it'll be a lot of fun.
That's what John Hammond said.
Yes.
Okay. So for viewers and listeners who are familiar with the show, we'd like to start things off talking about things we may have read or watched lately, if we liked them or we didn't like them. I'll go
Mhm.
first just to give Krystal some time to talk to gather her thoughts. Finally got around to watching the '70s classic Dog Day Afternoon, which I'd only seen clips of, but finally watched the whole thing. Just loved it. It was brilliant. Loved the storytelling and the acting and the directing and just the way the whole thing played out. And thought it was just phenomenal. And just so glad I finally got around to watching it. And we had to rent that because it's not available on streaming. Well, it was on streaming, but we had to rent it. But it's not streaming for free anywhere. But if you get the chance to watch it and you haven't watched it, do yourself a favor and definitely highly recommend it. Krystal, what about you?
Most recently, I watched Coco. I'd seen it before, but it's a lot of
Mhm.
fun family film. And I don't know, I just love the music and the family and all the interactions. Really big into storytelling and learning about other cultures. So it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I remember watching that, and I was thinking that there were because that's the way it is with those Disney movies. There's always some kind of twist near the end, and I'm not going to give it
Hmm.
away here. But that when that came around, it was surprising, but also not surprising. I guess that's the best way to put it. But I thought
Yeah.
they did a really good job with just overall and the whole storytelling. And Disney's just, they're notorious for really solid storytelling like that.
Hmm. Definitely.
Okay. Good stuff. Good stuff. Okay. Well, Krystal, let's talk a little bit about you. I mean, how did you get your start? Were you always a writer as a child? Were you just a voracious reader and said, I'm gonna try my hand at this and see how it goes?
Yeah, I was a big reader. I read anything I could get my hands on. I know that there was like one summer where they had the reading contest where you got that pamphlet and you had to write down all the books that you read for the
Hmm.
year. Like I filled mine up within a couple of weeks and had to go back and ask for another one from the public library. So, yes, I just really loved immersing myself into different stories and especially ones like with sci-fi, Jurassic Park, and
Okay.
historical fiction. I really liked the Dear America series growing up, the journals of young girls growing up in different and important times in history. And those always really stuck with me. And I think it was after finishing up college, I got into a really bad reading slump. I was having a really hard time finding something to read.
Hmm.
And it was my brother who had asked me, like, well, what do you want to read? And I was like, well, I think I want to read something about young girls falling in love. I don't know what time period, but I just really want to read something that isn't what I'm seeing. And he's like, okay, well, then why don't you just write it? And he was in the midst of doing his own writing challenge, and he told me to join him. And so like, that's what kind of started me writing in the first place. And I just really enjoyed it. So I kept going.
Okay. I want to say like somewhere in your bio was I think so. The Davenports was your debut novel.
Yes.
And I think it was that was from it was the NaNoWriMo, the November Writing Challenge
Hmm.
thing. That's kind of what
Yes.
got it all started.
Yes. So I joined him in that challenge with like an earlier manuscript that is like covered in dust right now. But the Davenports, the Davenports was written during that time too. So I got like a good chunk of that story completing during that challenge. So for those who don't know, November is National Novel Writing Month, and during that 30-day period, you're challenged to write like 50,000 words of a novel. And so my brother was in the midst of doing that. He'd done it previous years. And so he told me to join him that year. And it was a lot of fun. I learned that plot, that I, as a writer, need outlines, that I just
Hmm.
can't just
You're
write
not, you're not a
willy-nilly.
pantser.
I did for like that first project, but for the Davenports, I definitely needed it.
Hmm.
It has different points of views, so keeping track of the four characters that narrate the story, the outline was instrumental in getting to the finish line.
Yeah, I was going to say I have a question about that, but let's just get back to a little bit about, I guess, your reading background. Did you have any
Mhm.
particular favorite authors or series that you just like? I love this. I want to read it again, or it was kind of like those were the inspiration for your wanting to write?
Yeah, so I really liked R.L. Stine. I read anything that he read in the Fierce series and Goosebumps. Uh, I really liked Cassandra Clare, and I really liked Elizabeth Peters. She mostly wrote adult books, but their content were, I would say, like good for young adults.
Hmm.
Uh, Her series, the Amelia Peabody series, was really my favorite. There's 20 books in the series, so like there's plenty to keep me occupied, and I did enjoy going back and rereading them. But it's about this young woman who wants to be an archaeologist, and it's set in the late 1800s, and they told her, you know, you're a woman, this is not a profession for you, you can't do this. So she just studied from her father's immense library, and then when he passed away, he left her all his money. So she took all the money and moved to Egypt, and she said, I'll show you, I'll become an Egyptologist. And so she does. She gets to follow around these scientists. Some of them are based on real characters, some of them are real people, some of them are the actual people in the backgrounds of her stories. And she's solving murder mysteries while she's excavating sites and falling in love and making new friends and learning the language. So it was something that really drew me into storytelling, and then having strong female characters who kind of don't follow societal norms and basically people's expectations of them, and just going headlong into what they aspire to do in life.
Okay. Oh, I could definitely see that having read the Davenports and the
Mhm.
Davenports more than this, I can definitely see that definitely on full display. So let's talk
Yeah.
about the books themselves. Like we said, so we have the Davenports, the debut novel, and the Davenports more than this. So what was, I guess, the inspiration for the story? I guess you alluded to this before. I kind of like your brother kind of said, "Hey, if you want this kind of story, go write it." But what was it about this particular topic or these characters that was so appealing to you that just inspired you to like, I'm going to put a story together about this?
Yeah, so the inspiration for the Davenports came from an article that I'd read on the Smithsonian website about C.R. Patterson. He was a gentleman who had escaped enslavement and started a carriage company that his son later converted to an automobile company. And that particular article had said that it was the first and only African American owned automobile company in America. And I just thought that was fascinating. Like, that was very interesting to me. It was something that I hadn't learned in history.
Hmm.
And then as I clicked through more links on that article, I found one that mentioned that he had three daughters. So my next thought was like, what was their life like growing up in 1910 and having a wealthy father and some semblance of privilege, but then also like between the Reconstruction era and civil rights, there's Jim Crow. So like, how was their life balancing or straddling these two different existences? Like, that kind of got me thinking, and that's what I wanted to write about, what these girls' lives would have been like at this time.
Okay, that I totally get that.
Mhm.
Actually, you know what I usually like to ask the writer to do is like, what's the elevator pitch for this story? Like, for someone who's like, okay, well, okay, this story about the Davenports, who are they? What's going on here? You talked about, it's the turn of the century, and it's
Mhm.
a very wealthy family. So just to tell us what it's about.
Sure. So the Davenports are one of the few Black families that have wealth and status in 1910 Chicago, and their two daughters are of marrying age, and they are out in the market looking for bachelors to settle down with. The eldest daughter, Olivia, is very much impassioned in following what her parents want for her, but then she meets a young gentleman, a lawyer from Alabama, who kind of opens her eyes to some of the struggles of other Black Americans who don't have her family's money. And then her younger sister, Helen, is very much interested in the family carriage business that she also wants to help her brother bring into the future and establish it as a automobile company. And she kind of is inspired by that Amelia Peabody character where she doesn't care that she's a girl. She wants to be a mechanic and be involved in the family business. And then the other two points of view are their two friends, Ruby, who's Olivia's best friend, who's in love with John, and then Amy Rose, who's a friend of theirs, but also a maid in their household. Amy Rose's character is inspired by Madam C.J. Walker. So it's another historical figure influencing this story. But it's
Oh,
about them falling in love and pursuing their dreams.
okay. I did want to ask you. So, you have these four protagonists slash main
Mhm.
characters. So, I mean, after you read the article about the carriage maker and his three daughters,
Mhm.
did you think, okay, did you originally think I'm going to have one main character, or did you, when you from the outset, did you think I'm going to have, at least two daughters, or maybe two daughters and two friends? Like, what was the process for putting this story together?
So I think when I started writing it, I had just finished reading Marie Lu's Legend series. And in that one, she has multiple points of views.
Hmm.
And it was the first time I had read a story told from alternating points of view. And I just thought it was amazing. I loved how one character would make a decision that would impact the second character in their chapters, even though that they were cities apart. Um, the two stories didn't exist without each other. And I really liked that you got to hear their different perspectives. So I think from the offset, I really wanted to do multiple points of views. And I think during this time period, having Helen and Olivia be the only two narrators, their backgrounds are pretty similar, even though their personalities are very different. I wanted to show a little bit more of Chicago. So Amy Rose, as a servant in the household, she kind of has the working class point of view. She doesn't have the restrictions that maybe Olivia and Helen have, where she doesn't really need a chaperone to go out all the time. And for Ruby, her character kind of was a rival of Olivia's at first, but as a best friend, they can have all these interactions together. But what Ruby brings to the table is that her father is running for mayor. So she also comes from like a great background, but then her father's mayoral campaign kind of drains the family's coffers.
Hmm.
So she has this other obstacle of trying to keep up appearances.
Okay, so I did want to address this though. So you just described the four main characters and kind of
Hmm.
like their story, but they all intersect and they all overlap. So I guess the question is, as a writer,
Hmm.
what was your process for putting all of these together? Did you like develop Olivia's storyline first, or was it kind of like, okay, here's Olivia's, here's what happens to her. Okay, this would impact Helen in this particular way, but this would also impact Ruby and Amy Rose. Was it a kind of a linear thing, or was it kind of just kind of like, okay, I'm gonna like move Olivia's piece a little bit further, and then it's a Helen, and then it's just kind of like one character at a time?
So I think I had different milestones or like conversion points for each of the characters. Like they would all be at a certain party together, or they'd all be at a campaign event together. And just certain instances where I did want them to overlap, but they
Hmm.
each kind of had their own story. And then when I did my outline, I had like chapter one, Olivia, this is what's going on in her story. Next chapter is Helen. We get introduced to her. I think by alternating their points of view, I kind of did it like one person at a time, but I didn't write like their full story. Although the whole time I didn't know where I wanted each girl's story to end.
Oh,
So,
wow.
yeah.
That's really interesting because so was it a case of, like we addressed before, because you were outlining it, so did you have an ending in mind, or was it going to be more of a I'm going to see where the characters take me type of thing?
Oh, I had an ending for each of the girls. I knew where I wanted them to end up. Their journeys changed a little bit.
Oh.
For Ruby, her character is very impulsive. So I found
Hmm.
sometimes when I was writing her storyline, she would lead me in a direction that wasn't in the outline, but just in the heat of the moment, the words are flowing, her story just like takes off, and I was like, okay, so this is how Ruby's chapter ended. Let me look at how it affected Olivia's, how it affected Helen's. Like maybe I have to go in and change a conversation that they had or change a
Mm.
setting. So there were ripple effects anytime there was a change. So like that kept it really interesting.
Yeah, I was going to ask, did you ever have to go back and like really change things around? Like, oh, the way that this particular storyline was heading, and all of a sudden you came up with this new idea for another character, but that has ramifications, as you said, a ripple effect on everything else. Was everything kind of established, or was there a lot of, okay, I got to go back, I got to readjust this, I've got, oh, okay, now I've got to, fix this over here, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I would say the biggest change came from Ruby's character because in the
Okay.
original outline, she and Olivia were rivals. They weren't friends at all. They didn't get along. And so I was about a third to halfway through drafting when I just didn't like where the story was going.
Mm.
And I went back and I made them best friends. So that took a lot of going through the story and
Mm.
changing all their interactions and changing the interactions between their parents and like writing that backstory where it is two families who are very close and their children are growing up together, that they're almost like one large family. So yeah, that change took like a lot of backtracking to kind of push the story forward.
Did that really help with the development for everything after that? Because originally they were so conflicted, but now they're best friends. So did it kind of not open up more doors for you, but did it make the development of each of their storylines a little bit easier to work with?
It did. It did. So I didn't have to like create tension
Hmm.
that I just that myself I didn't buy into.
Oh, okay. Okay. Sorry, I'm just looking at my next question.
Oh yeah, no problem.
One of the I love historical fiction, and so I'm always paying attention to the other details apart from the story and the characters. So I have to ask, like, how much research did you do? Because as you said, it takes place in 1910 Chicago. So did you
Mhm.
have to research 1910 Chicago, what it was like what the neighborhoods were like, and also you also address fashion and politics of the
Mhm.
time, and just that whole setting. I mean, was there a lot of research, or did you kind of think, okay, I'm gonna have like placeholders, and we could go back and see what the appropriate, outfit is, or what this part of Chicago was like?
Yeah, I did a little bit of both. I had some placeholders when I started drafting, but
Hmm.
then I also did a lot of research. I was very lucky that the Chicago Public Library had a lot of their resources online. So I was able to
Oh,
look
wow.
at, yeah, I was able to look at city maps, uh, restaurants, their menus. Um, like that was really fun. I was able to find like Bloomingdale's magazines from that time period. I didn't even know Bloomingdale's was that old, but it
Hmm.
was. I was able to see ads in newspapers. So like that was really cool to be able to go through and see the articles and get just the way people spoke or wrote in them. Like that was
Oh,
really
wow.
interesting and be able to look at the clothes that were considered high fashion.
Hmm.
So like that was really fun for me. And the city maps were difficult. Growing up with like you to use your phone to tell you where to go. So forgive me,
You're definitely
native.
younger than I am.
Yeah, so I want to say forgive me all the native Chicagoans who tell me like, wait, this is not where this is. Like I tried my best.
Hmm.
But like one of the big things that I noticed when I first started writing was that the Field Museum where Helen goes to often, uh, the location that I know when I visited Chicago was not the original location. That's not where it was in 1910. So that was something that once I found that out, I had to go back in the story and kind of rearrange like street names and like where it was located. So that was pretty interesting.
That's great. Yeah, I think it
Hmm.
definitely adds an authenticity to the story. It doesn't feel like you're making it all up as you go. It's kind of like, this is all based in fact and the truth. And so there all of these things are influencing the characters and the setting that the story's in. I also noticed that your writing does a really good job of involving the five senses because you're talking about because a lot of the like the characters like how it feels like when someone holds one of the girl's hands
Mhm.
or you definitely do a lot of smell like about perfume and cologne. Boy, you talk about like every man's cologne in that entire story I noticed. But also the sounds around the house and the sounds in the city as they're going about. There's a smattering of taste. I thought there'd be more food involved in the story,
Mhm.
but that's just my perspective. So is that just your writing style, or was that you just trying to help convey the whole experience of this is in 1910 Chicago, and this is what this family is like, and this is all the things that are happening around them.
I think it was a little bit of both, but I also like want to give a huge shout out to like my high school English teachers, especially Mrs. Gibson, who when we would break down stories in class, she would say, always look for the five senses. That always makes the story come alive. And I think that's something that just stuck with me. It's something I notice when I read if they're describing food, if they're eating, and if someone's cooking in another room, you can smell it. If you're walking on uneven floors or someone's like running, like you hear all these different sounds. So that was something that stuck with me.
Hmm.
And so I'm glad that it stuck out with you too when I was writing
I was
because
going to
I,
say, shout out to Mrs. Gibson. You should
yeah,
have if she's still around, have
yeah,
you sent her copies of the books?
yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's great.
So yeah, all of my English teachers have a dedication sentence for them in my acknowledgments in the first book. And I was lucky enough to go back to my high school last week
Oh,
and do
wow.
a in conversation with one of the current students, and my teachers were there. So that was really great.
Oh, I'm sure there were a lot of chests swollen with pride throughout
Yeah.
the whole English department. That's great.
Hmm.
This is geared towards a slightly younger audience, and it was a little surprising, I guess, to a certain extent, like how chaste the characters are. You know,
Hmm.
there's a lot of kissing going on, holding hands, and that's pretty much it. So is that a reflection of the values of the time period? Because, early 20th century, or was that you were just that's the kind of story you wanted to tell?
I think it was a reflection of the time period. I think
Okay.
a lot of the societal constraints, I didn't want to push too hard on that. And I think the story I really wanted to focus on the relationship between the young women and
Hmm.
the siblings. So, yeah, I think I was following more of what was expected at that time period.
Yeah, I did notice that there's a lot of kind of like society norms, like that's not a proper way for a woman to act, and then
Hmm.
and Helen, the younger sister, she's got the chaperone, Mrs. Milford, who's just it was a great supporting character, and
Yeah.
I think she's like an unsung hero of the story.
Mhm. Yeah, she's pretty funny. I like her. She's encouraging of Helen's like passion and her drive to be an individual, but also tells her like, hey, these are the way things should be done, and kind of choose the best time and place to push back and, branch out from what's expected.
Yeah, I think that is one of the strong points of the whole story is that you have these four women as the main characters, but you have this huge circle of supporting characters, and everybody has a role to fill in the story, and I think they all do a really good job. Like even a couple of characters that are not even in that many scenes, like I think a friend of the brother as like a Greenfield. I think
Mhm.
he's even there. He's not sometimes he's not the best character, but he serves a purpose, and I think that everybody there's no standouts of like why is this character here type of thing. It's just kind of like everybody is a piece of the puzzle for the whole thing, and I think that's just really commendable. And one of the things I really enjoyed is that the four main characters that they're all strong women on their own, that there's nobody's meek and there's no like I'm just out to get a man type
Mhm.
of thing. It's almost like they are trying to adhere to societal norms, but also kind of trying to find their own way, not be totally independent, but kind of like, I know this is what is expected of me, but this is what I want to do. And there is some pushback from the families. So was that a challenge to write and what are the things I also wanted to ask you is that, a lot of writers that, especially because my thing is screenwriting, and so they always say
Mhm.
like each character in your story is some facet of your personality. So, I mean, are all four women are they like comparable to you in some way? Are you more like I'm an Olivia, I'm a Helen type of character, or is there just a little bit of each of them that's based on you?
I would say a little bit of each of them has a part of my personality, and I think a little bit of people that I know and love. And it's just funny that you say like they each have their own desires and what they want. And I think them realizing that that's different from their parents is something that we all experience at one point. At one point, like we're all, okay, mom and dad or your parental figure is like, do this. And you're like, okay, great. And then as you grow and you learn and you have new experiences, what you want and your vision of like how you see your future starts to like differ from maybe what your parents expected of you. I mean, I studied biology because I really liked science,
Mhm.
but it's not exactly where I ended up. And I think part of that is just learning and finding like new inspiration from your experiences.
Okay, and would you say are there people in your life that maybe they were influences for some of the characters, not just the four main characters, but like, not saying your parents are like, Mr. and Mrs. Davenport, but
Mhm.
you portray them as having a really strong relationship and they still make they make goo-goo eyes at each other type of thing. But are there people in your life that had an influence on any of the characters in these stories?
I want to say that the relationship that the Davenport siblings have, where they're kind of bickering, teasing each other, and also still very supportive, is similar to me and my siblings. I'm the
Hmm.
oldest of four, so we're always like pairing off and doing things together, and then coming back, exchanging notes, kind of like how the siblings do at the end of the book, and just kind of keeping tabs on each other and teasing each other and probably being each other's alibis. So it's it's a lot of fun. That was fun for me to write.
Okay. One of the things I really enjoy, like I said, I really like historical fiction, and I think one of my just overall favorite parts of the whole series is that whole transitional feel from, I guess, post-reconstruct. To me, it was post-reconstruction to right
Mhm.
before World War One, because it's 1910 Chicago.
Yeah.
So, it's a new age, it's a new kind of society, and you have these families that are in a particular situation. So, is that something that you were really into, or was it just more like the idea of what would it be like for these families at that particular time?
It was a little bit of what it was like for these families at this time because I think post Reconstruction, there was a lot of opportunity for Black Americans. And I also feel like it was a time period that I hadn't read a lot about. So I know soon after that is World War One, and then like the flappers and everything like that. And I feel like there's a lot of stories about that, but not necessarily about like this time period. And that's what really drew me into writing in 1910.
Did you have to do a lot of research just about, I guess, society at that time? Because we talked about, the research on different aspects, but
Yeah.
you're writing about a particular time in history. Did you have to do a lot of research? Like, okay, what was acceptable for a young lady to do? Like, was she allowed to do this, or going out and listening to that? Oh, that hot music. Oh,
Yeah.
that's scandalous. That type of thing.
Mhm. Yeah, I did a little bit of research on that time period, and I read The Warmth of Other Suns, and I watched other films around this time period, and I think some of like the novels that my mom reads that span from 1800s to like the early 1940s, just like reading some of the books that she has, like that helped influence, okay, what was the sense of propriety during this time? And what were the boundaries that were okay to push? And like how far can these characters go? And then also thinking of writing for young adults more on the more chaste side, like where do I want this story to like land? Like who do I want this in the hands of? And I think for me, like this is the type of story that I wish I had that summer in seventh and eighth grade when I was like flying through so many books. So yeah, so I kept all of that in mind as I was writing.
Okay, I also want to ask, and again, the books are the debut novel is The Davenports, and the newest one, The Davenports, More Than This. That it's definitely it's a unique look at, I guess, the Black experience, especially in early 20th century America. So was there a lot of stuff you wanted to make sure to include? Because I mean, Olivia's character becomes very involved with the suffragettes and also about improving society for the Black community.
Mhm.
Was there more research for that, or was it kind of like this is what I really it's a message I want to get across?
Yeah, there was more research for that, looking to see if there was other instances of suffragettes, how they interacted with other civil rights activists, looking at for Washington Dwight's character, what it meant from traveling from the South to the North and like where people were congregating, where people were organizing, and looking at like how they organized. I think there's a scene where Olivia goes with him to a protest, and it's the first time she's seeing a clash between activists and officers. And for her, it's kind of a surprising experience and probably not one that she's really used to because she hasn't been exposed to that. She's very sheltered. So like Olivia's character is kind of the person that a lot of the readers see this for the first time because she's experiencing it for the first time. And that was really important for me to have in her character development, her experiencing everything for the first time and bringing the readers along with her on that journey.
Yeah, I was going to say that I think that was, I'm not sure if that was in the end of the first book or somewhere in the second book that Olivia talks about like this is the first time she'd ever like even left Chicago,
Hmm.
which I guess to me was just mind blowing because I
Yeah.
always thought like, you know, a very wealthy family, even early 20th century that they would have traveled a bit, you know, like gone to Europe a lot. I mean, in the
Hmm.
second book, one of the subplots is the father of the family. You know, he's out of the picture the whole thing, the whole time
Yeah.
he's in Europe. And I just thought it was just so odd because I'm so used to hearing all these stories about families traveling and you know going all over the world. And was that just part of your decision, I guess, for Olivia's storyline that you know she's got you know she's finding out about herself, but also that she's kind of her world is expanding.
Hmm. Yeah, for her it was a big point to have it be that she is having her world open up and show her all these new opportunities and kind of opening her eyes up to knowing that there are other things out there that she can experience and learn. And I think also part of it is the father's background, probably his experience traveling from the South, escaping enslavement. He probably doesn't want to leave where it's safe and comfortable and kind of probably brought that into his family unit, trying to keep them close.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And the one character I do want to address, I think she might be my favorite is Helen, just
Hmm.
because she is just so rebellious from like page one.
Yeah.
And she's like, I don't need a man, and I want to work on cars, and you know, I'm gonna reject all of this. This is how a lady acts type of thing. But as one would expect, you know, there's a character arc that she slowly changes, but it doesn't become the character that is expected of her. But as with all the characters, she kind of like creates her own identity that's based on
Hmm.
what she wants, but also a little bit of what her parents want. But again, getting back to the whole subplot of cars, I just thought it was a brilliant I don't even know if I want to call it a plot device, just a storyline to have the development. Okay, well, cars are developing technology,
Hmm.
and it's not a spoiler. The father, you know, it's a carriage company, but he's like, oh, people like our carriages, but the son and Helen, they're like, but you know, but cars are the next big thing, and I love the clash that's between them. Uh, Again, this goes back to the research. I mean, how did you find out? Like, did you have to read like how fast did cars go? And like, there's a character in the second book. He's a race car driver,
Hmm.
and you just had to kind of like dive into this information just to make sure that it was a valid part of the story.
Yeah, that one took a lot of research too. It was fun though because I do enjoy cars. I drive like a older Mustang and like my dad and I are always tinkering with it because there's always something wrong with it. So, yeah, it was a lot of fun looking up that information as well. And it was a lot of looking at old car manuals and articles about antique cars, finding diagrams and trying to figure out, okay, if I am going to talk about this particular model of this car, I need to find what this diagram looked like at this time and like finding out the speeds and the tires.
Hmm.
I think there's I can't remember the name of it now, but there was a documentary about the early Ford models that I
Mm.
watched and like was taking notes while I was watching it. And uh, yeah, that was a fun part of the research too. But yeah, it did take a lot of paying attention to detail and like taking detailed notes. I have a OneNote that I use to write both books, and one of the tabs was cars and all their information. Each character had their own tab. That's how I kept track of all the
Oh,
guys'
wow.
smells and
Okay.
whose favorite color. And this person used to like rub their chin when they're nervous, and this person like scratched their nose. And
So it kind of like a character info sheet type of thing.
yes, they each
Oh,
had their almost like a baseball card, all their
oh, all their
important
stats.
facts. Yes.
I was going to say because you talked about working on cars with your dad, so I guess that aspect to your personality that was a big
Mhm,
influence on the character of Helen, who she works loves to work on cars, but it's about her working with her brother because the, the,
mhm.
the father doesn't want anything to do with it.
Yeah.
That's great to hear. So the big question is, okay, so the first book, The Davenports, that started the whole thing. And the
Mhm.
story continues with the Davenports more than this. So the big question is there going to be, the next chapter in the Davenport family saga?
I mean, I hope so. I'm currently working on a different project right now.
Aha.
But I really do love the story of the Davenports and the girls, and I think it would be exciting to see where they go to next, seeing what comes to me.
I was going to say, do you have ideas kind of like percolating? You have like an idea file, you just jot things down like, oh, this could happen, or
Mhm.
this could happen to this character.
It's like very like it doesn't have a form yet. It's just very
Hmm.
like out there. But
Okay,
yeah.
that's great. Crystal, what I'd like to ask our writer guests. So, what advice would you give to writers? I mean, it could be about writing historical fiction. It could be writing about something on a culture basis. It could just be about doing research. I mean, I love what Mrs. Gibson said about, incorporating the five senses. I mean,
Mhm.
if there was one takeaway that you would like writers to get from, I guess, your experience writing the Davenport's books, what would it be?
I would say don't stop writing. It's a very solitary project, but I swear you'll find your people. I think that the more I did it and the more passionate I got about the story, like that really showed. I think it helped the story shine. So just write what you're passionate about and keep going. And I think that you'll find your story and the people who will appreciate it.
Okay, that's
Yeah,
fantastic. Krystal Marquis, where can people find out more about you and your work and anything else they might want to find out?
sure. So you can find out about me on my website, krystalmarquis.com, and also on Instagram and threads at Christabel_reads, because it started out as a reading Instagram. So I'll also share what I'm reading on there as well.
Okay, that is fantastic. Well, Krystal
Mhm.
Marquis, once again, the books are, you can get them on Amazon, or I guess people can get them through your website as well.
There's links to different retailers on my website.
Okay,
Yeah.
great.
Mhm.
So again, the debut novel is The Davenports. That's the gold one. And then the new one is The Davenports More Than This, which is the, what, lavender, the lilac one?
Yes.
Okay. And they are very, if you love historical fiction and just early, late 19th century, early 20th century Americana type stuff, you can't go wrong. These are great, and they're really, and if you like really strong female protagonists, and there's four of them in both of these books, I think you cannot go wrong with getting the Davenport series. Highly recommended. Well, Krystal, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me. This was wonderful.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm glad you enjoyed it. And viewers
Yeah.
and listeners, if you enjoyed today's show, please hit like and please hit like and feel free to leave a comment and subscribe. Social media, you can check out my screenwriting blog. That's maximumz.blog. Still on Twitter for the time being at maximum_z. And this show has its own account at podcast CWL, but starting to make more of a presence on Blue Sky. For myself, it's at Pez Screenwriting. And for the show, still at podcast CWL. Instagram at Pez Screenwriting. And you can also check out my screenwriting books, the Go Ahead and Ask series. Those are on Amazon. Like I said, that's Krystal. I'm Paul. This has been the Creative Writing Life podcast. Thanks for listening. Stay safe, stay healthy, and most importantly, go write something.